Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I want to focus my comments tonight on the Scope 3 emissions section of this particular legislation, because the effects of the indirect emissions in Scope 3 won't begin and end with large business. This is an entirely new and major impost on business and industry, but it will particularly impact on small and family businesses. It will actually impact on those who haven't yet realised what's ahead for them, as we've heard tonight, starting 27-28, but by 2030 being mandatory. So ASIC itself has said that the compliance will be passed on to small business. It's not just large business. The compliance cost and work will be passed on to small business. ASIC itself has said so. And I do know that the Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, acknowledged by ASIC, very concerned about the impacts of the Scope 3 emissions, because many of the entities that small businesses bank with, the businesses that small business supply or buy from, will have to provide the Scope 3 sustainability report each financial year. But that regime actually forces all companies with turnovers over 50 million or with assets over, it's not profit, it's turnover over 50 million or assets over 25 million to disclose and report annually audited and verified Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions disclosure to ASIC. Now, Scope 3 emissions are those that happen when a business sells its products, when it buys the inputs it needs to run the business, as well as reporting to financial institutions when the banks get involved with this, which they are and will be with this legislation. They'll actually have to report to financial institution that the business, the small and family business, borrows from, perhaps invests in, or has lending from in different ways. So this will be a mandatory reporting process for businesses with, as I said, over $50 million turnover or $25 million asset level, that Treasury itself, the Treasury itself has said that this will cost $1.3 million per business a year to comply with. Now that's $2.3 billion a year, every year, in compliance cost being passed on to small business, to both their customers and their suppliers. And I think, given what we're seeing here in this place, the $2.3 billion will prove to be a conservative estimate, given that the Labor government legislation we are dealing with today and what's encompassed in it. Now, if those small businesses cannot pass on their costs of all of that work, the auditing, the collecting of data, to their buyers, they will have to close. They've got no choice. Good luck in trying to get increased prices from major supermarkets or big businesses, given their market power, when you're a small business. Independent research has put the cost to the economy of red tape at over $176 billion a year. So we're going to add, the Labor government's going to add another $2.3 billion to that for business. And imagine what the reduction in cost of living and reduction of cost to the running small and family businesses would be if that $176 billion was reduced or gone. By default, this bill simply adds another $2.3 billion at least to the 176, just more complex, confusing and costly red and green tape, designed probably to keep busy the extra 36,000 additional public servants that Labor has employed. Now, I had a discussion with a family dairy and dairy manufacturing business regarding the Scope 3 emissions in this bill. It will be forced to report based on that $25 million asset threshold. And the first response I got was, does the Labor government want to send all businesses broke? And it's a fair call. The owner said, well, this is just the next layer of green and red tape we have to deal with, and it's costing us a fortune. And this is coming at the same time so many businesses in my southwest, in manufacturing, hospitality, freight, construction and agriculture, have been and are under enormous personal and financial pressure. They're struggling for workers, there's no accommodation available for workers if they can get them, and the owners themselves are simply exhausted. These are the people who work in and on their business every day. We do know that 16,000 businesses have become insolvent in the last 2 years. So here are the same small businesses that are going to have to pay through the nose to provide professionally assessed, assured and audited reports on their Scope 3 emissions every year to give to those bigger businesses that the member previously spoke about. And this additional cost is coming at a time when, according to COSBOA's Luke Arkestrat, that there are 1 million small businesses who are not able to pay themselves properly or break even. That's 2.5 million small businesses in Australia, employing almost half the private sector workforce that will be impacted. And there's no doubt that these same small businesses will be in the firing line from the Environmental Defenders Office and other activists, given the Labor government's continuing funding of the EDO in relation to this reporting process. And those same small businesses will have the foot on their throat, worried constantly and under pressure because of the threat and risk of regulatory action from ASIC, the ACCC, their banks, the businesses they're dealing with, or activists. And how much information will actually be enough for these major corporates? Will they demand what will effectively be anti-competitive information that gives them even more market power and control by exposing the finances and cost inputs small businesses, the small business that supply them or buy from them? And how will big corporates weaponise that information? And how many small family businesses will be at risk of being debanked if they can't or don't comply? Because that's what we're facing here from the finance sector. And as we know, the major banks in Australia have an enormous amount of power already. I recently got an email this week from another bank that's shutting down another whole tranche of branches, some in my electorate. And so they're even going as far as charging customers, these banks, to access their own money held in accounts, in debit card accounts. That's your money sitting in a debit card account, and yet you're charged to access your money that's sitting there. But small and family businesses are under enormous financial and bureaucratic pressure. Already we see the same information being asked for in different ways from various agencies over and over, local, state, federal. A massive, endless reporting process, each slightly different to meet the specific demands, adding layer upon layer of cost, pressure and work for small family businesses. Multiple and ever-increasing requests, time, money and grief for that small business owner. The ones that are working their hearts out. You know, they're often the people that give people their first job or their last job in life. And these are the people who are time poor, who are simply seeking the simple and basic right to supply to their buyer or the corporation. When Australia's productivity has fallen and in global economic competitive rankings, Australia has declined from 4th to 19th in 2023, that's actually the harm that red tape is imposing in this country that is helping to make us less productive and far less competitive. Independent research shows that since 2005, federal red tape has increased by 88%, two-thirds greater than the national economic growth. And yet here Labor is imposing yet another massive increase in red and green tape. And I just want to look at the practical example of the layers of regulation and compliance needed in a small business. And I will talk about a dairy farm, for instance. Buying, selling and finance will all have to be accounted for under Scope 3, demanded by the bigger businesses. So the farmer will have to pay to have their whole business assessed and apportion their Scope 3 emissions across all of their inputs, like bought-in feed, electricity, irrigation, fuel, cartage, contractors' services, repairs and maintenance, hardware, new infrastructure, fertiliser, telecommunications, you name it. They then will have to do the same to assess, apportion, audit and report their Scope 3 emissions for every business they sell to. So that could be the milk processor, the abattoir they sell cattle to, the supermarket or buyer of their cattle at a sale yard, the buyers of calves, because they will all feed in to this interconnected elastic stream of Scope 3 emissions reporting. They will have to report. The banks that they borrow from or have investments with will demand this information from farmers and small businesses, and I am really concerned about the debanking of customers that we're seeing. But of course, on a farm, the circumstances change as often as the weather. And I just remind people watching, no farmers, no food. So the cost and compliance will be variable, onerous and obscene, in my opinion. And then I look at the small businesses that supply the dairy industry that will have the same reporting obligations and pressures. The milk processor will have to assess, apportion, audit and report their Scope 3 emissions up and down their supply, value and finance chain. The local machinery dealer will have to do the same, whether they are selling, be it John Deere, be it Massey Ferguson or any other brand. These companies may well have assets over the 25 million. They may have to report their Scope 3 emissions up and down their individual supply and value chain. So when you look at this, this is just an extraordinary layer upon layer of regulation, of red tape and endless paperwork. But so will the abattoir. The abattoir will have to count for all of the Scope 3 emissions of every farmer supplying them with cattle. The livestock transporters who deliver the cattle to their yards. And we've seen the effect that our major supermarkets have had on cattle markets and prices. And what about the constant seasonal changes experienced by farmers, be it a dry season, be it times where you need to apply more fertiliser, the seasonal aspects of when you're seeding or doing hay or harvesting? All of these will change the reporting requirements constantly. So, you know, here we are punishing even more small businesses, our farmers, especially the farmers who are working their land, working on greater productivity all of the time. And of course, as I said, they could be supplying a range of different entities, and this goes across all different businesses. When you look across whether you're a winery, for instance, selling grapes to a winery, the fruit and vegetables that go to a supermarket that has to report Scope 3, that all comes back to the supplier of those products. The individual grain growers, perhaps, with land and farming assets over the 25 million. I don't know what impact this is actually going to have on local government, whether the bankers will need their emissions to report to meet their obligations as well. And I don't know if the local government projects and programs that they actually tender out, will the businesses that supply those have to report their Scope 3 emissions and provide those sustainability reports. So it goes on. And irrigation cooperatives, their members and customers up and down, businesses like Albemarle, Simcoa, Alcoa, Perkins in my patch, Dorrell, Fulton Hogan, Cube, Dale Alcock, all of their supply and value chains will have to be accounted for with Scope 3. So I just find that this is just an extraordinary mesh of additional requirement. It actually reminds me of a terrible elastic condition, Mr Deputy Speaker. This just will filter down at all levels. It's just a massive impost on small and family business, and even the bigger businesses and the major businesses getting on with their business. They've got people that can do this sort of work for them. The small and family businesses work in their business all day and sometimes half the night, and this type of reporting has to come over and above that. Plus they will have to pay what I can see there's going to be a new industry built around this and a new bureaucracy in Canberra that will have to deal with this as well. So when you put it all together, Mr Deputy Speaker, I just think the inclusion of Scope 3 emissions and how that will filter right down from the top to the smallest business right across the board is going to add so much cost and so many more layers of useless regulation in many terms for those small businesses that they are forced to comply with.